Is Lent 1, and I'm going to be a little bit controversial maybe. I don't know, we'll see what happens. See what letters the Dean gets by Monday about the assistant priest. We'll see what happens. Perhaps one of the greatest problems faced in the modern church over the few centuries has been the evangelical focus on the sinner's prayer. I'm in trouble already. Now, we probably know it quite well. It's a favourite among the modern evangelists who believe, like the salesman, if they get people to believe their pitch, they'll say the sinner's prayer and then they'll save and they can tick another one off that they've saved that person. I remember when I was a teenager reading books about these great evangelists. And I could imagine myself in these halls with lots of people coming forward because of my incredible preaching and saying the sinner's prayer, and I could tick lots of people off. But I never really converted anyone. I mean, I was a good, keen Christian, went to youth group and all that sort of thing. But it didn't really happen. It was a little bit like my fishing. I threw out a lot of hooks, but I never brought back many fish. In fact, sometimes I even lost the hook. More often than not, that's what tended to happen. Now, as I said, some of you may be surprised, even alarmed at my words. For some people, saying the sinner's prayer, which is, Lord, I'm sorry for my sins, please come into my heart, that sort of thing. For some people, it marked a turning point in their life. And I have myself experienced the excitement of such stories, the testimonies that some people bring. But I do have a problem with it, and I'll explain it. When I was growing up here in Nelson, I actually went to Richmond Baptist Church as a teenager. You might have read about that in the monthly newsletter. In the Baptist church, you didn't get baptised as an infant, you got baptised as an adult because they believed that, well, the person has to make their own conscious decision. And so that's what tended to happen. There's no infant baptism in the Baptist church. And what tended to happen was that people became really keen in their faith, and they got to a stage where they wanted to be baptised, and we had a baptismal service, and they came in the swimming pool, almost not really a swimming pool, a baptismal pool. They came, got baptised, and moved on. However, what tended to happen, and this is only in my own limited experience, so it's totally unscientific, but what I tended to see was that these people, many of them, not all of them, but some of them, maybe not many, came, they got baptised. They were really keen in their faith, and then what happened was that they tended to fade away from their faith. And some even dropped out of church altogether. Baptism didn't seem to encourage them to go further in their faith. They simply slid away. And the danger that I see with that sort of thing, as with other aspects of our faith today, can also be seen throughout the Bible. In our reading this morning in Genesis 9, we have this story of Noah's Ark, and we know that all very well. And at the end of the flood, Noah made a covenant, not just with people, but with all flesh, all life, never to create a flood again that kills all life. Now, we know why the flood happened, don't we? Because the world was sinful, that God regretted creating the world. Pretty serious stuff. And it was a drastic, uncompromising, absolute act, the flood. It was a completely new start. But the interesting thing to note is that the flood didn't stop sin. Didn't stop people from turning away from God. Now, even when Jesus himself came into this world, and we read in 1 Peter this morning, that he suffered for the sins once and for all. His death was the ultimate sacrifice. His death is what we remember each week as we come up for communion. It's Christ's victory over sin, isn't it? However, even though Jesus did this incredible act for us, the reality is that people still sin. And many of us would agree with that. I mean, that's why we have our confession and absolution each week. Otherwise, why do we bother having it? So all these events, the flood, Jesus' death, baptism, are one-off acts. But there is an essential, ongoing aspect to all of them. It's kind of like being married. A lot of people focus on the wedding day. Mainly the woman, don't they? Then they wonder what happened after the wedding. No, they don't. Of course they don't. Wonder. Anyway, a marriage is not just the wedding day. Marriage starts normally after the wedding. And it's why we say for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health. Faith is not a state that we are in. Just like marriage isn't a state that we're in, marriage is a relationship. Faith is a relationship. That's what we have for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer. Now listen carefully. See if you agree with what I say. You don't have to agree with me. You may not. But one of Israel's major problems was that she thought that because she was God's chosen people, that was all that was needed. But the Bible clearly shows that this chosenness required them to live a certain way. And when they didn't live this certain way, they ended up being defeated by their enemies, and they ended up ultimately in exile. It didn't matter that they were God's chosen people. There was an ongoing aspect to it. And it was also why Jesus came, because of Israel's failure. They fell out of their covenantal relationship. And in the very same way, Christians need to understand that the sinner's prayer, although it can be a one-off event, doesn't mean that there isn't an ongoing aspect to it. Just like baptism is a one-off event, but it requires continual obedience, faithfulness, discipleship. Otherwise, our faith becomes a farce. And perhaps it's why people fell away after they were baptized. I don't know. Maybe they thought they'd come to some sort of spiritual utopia, and it didn't happen. Discipleship, self-sacrifice, dying to self are essential, ongoing aspects of our faith. As Christians, as followers of Christ, we no longer live for ourselves, but we live for Christ. It's that simple. Because the church, the followers of Christ, are called to continue the work of Christ now that he's gone. We're waiting for him to come back. And the reason that we continue to do the work of Christ is that it gives us far more life and meaning and satisfaction than anything we could do for ourselves, even if we owned the whole world. In fact, Jesus says we die to self in order to live for Christ. We love others, even those that are a pain in our neck. We put others first. We hold lightly to the riches of this world, because our hope, our joy, our peace, our meaning is found in a deep and profound relationship with God. And it is an ongoing relationship. It continues to grow. It is not a one-off prayer or act. Each day is a new day. And as we live this way, we experience all the blessings that God has for us. Now, it may not be financial like you may hear in some churches, because some of the poorest people in the world are often the happiest. But as I said, living this way, dying to self, living for Christ, is a greater blessing than anything else we could achieve for ourselves. And so my problem with the sinner's prayer, other than it's not actually in the Bible, is that it can give the impression that it is a one-off event. And we forget about discipleship that follows. How are we doing with our discipleship as followers of Christ? There can even be people who come to church or cathedrals for years, and yet they don't work on their discipleship. Their faith has become comfortable. And watch out for anyone who tries to push their boundaries. And faith for some has become like this ticket to heaven, where the impression is we've got our name in the book of life so that when we die, we know where we're going to end up. And when people think they are safely booked in, they tend to focus on things that aren't important. Just like Israel, when John the Baptist said to them, "Do not begin to say to yourselves, we have Abraham as our ancestor, for I tell you that God is able from these stones to raise up children to Abraham." They thought that they were safe without living as God required them to live. And the very same message can be said to us, the church today. Especially where today, especially in the West, where wealth, comfort and personal expectations are to the fore. It puts us in an incredibly dangerous position. It can do. Because our faith is not a state, it is a relationship. Faith is a relationship, a living relationship, based not on our preferences about what we like, but on God's will for our life, what God wants us to do. Look what happened to Jesus after his baptism. He ended up in temptations. He was lured by the attraction of worldly power, of fame and riches, what was best for himself. But Jesus chose God's way, all the way to the cross, because he saw that as the best way. Even though it wasn't nice, it wasn't comfortable. He had conflict. And look at the life of John the Baptist. Prison and execution. One of the most faithful people in the Bible. Jesus called him the greatest of all those born of woman. And indeed, throughout church history, we see many people suffering for their faith. But they suffered for a reason. to follow Christ. And for many it was hard, and it took courage, took perseverance. And the only way they could do that is with their eyes on God, not on themselves. How else can those people that we read about do what they had done, given up what they gave up? And we find that it is through the hardest and darkest of times that this faith not only survived, in many cases it flourished. And it seems that when life becomes comfortable and easy, that our faith is at greatest risk, because we make faith suit our own standards, not God's standards. We focus on what we like rather than what God requires. And these messages, these stories in the Bible, they scream out a warning to us time and time and time again. It is so loud, the stories that are told to us, to be wary, because our faith is first and foremost about being in relationship with a living God, on God's terms, not our own. Dying and living the life that God wills for us. And it is a lifelong journey. It is not a one-off event. And so I encourage you all, as we travel through this season of Lent, let us reassess within ourselves. Reassess with yourself. No one else is going to do it. The importance of discipleship in your own faith as we strive and work and toil to serve God faithfully. May this Lenten season challenge us, challenge our comforts, our personal idols. May this season reveal even more the will of God in our life, because it will bring us the greatest satisfaction, meaning, and privilege in this life, this short life that we have. May we know the true treasure of the treasure that we can build up in heaven, store up for ourselves. And so before we come to stating the creed, the statement of our faith, let's just take a few moments now and see what God may be saying to us, offering us at this time.